There are places in this world that seem to hold their breath as if waiting for someone foolish enough to step inside. Blackwood Hill was one such place, a lonely, decaying Victorian manor rising above the silent countryside, leaned forward like an old man tired of standing. No one had lived there for decades. No lights, no voices, no life, except for the whispering wind that curled through shattered windows. Like a trapped spirit clawing for escape. For most of its existence, the house was little more than a half-forgotten legend told by villagers around winter fires. Stories about strange lights flickering in the attic at night. Rumors of screams heard during thunder. And of course, the mirror, the thing no one dared talk about out loud. Not anymore, when Daniel Mercer, a 32-year-old history researcher from London, received a legal letter claiming he had inherited a property from a distant aunt he barely remembered. He assumed it was a scam or an administrative mistake. But when official documents confirmed the transfer and a key wrapped in black velvet arrived the following morning, something inside him whispered to go. Maybe curiosity, maybe destiny, or maybe the house was calling. Daniel arrived at Blackwood Hill just after sunset, his car headlights cutting through a wall of rising fog. The iron gate groaned open like a wounded animal. The gravel road beyond was cracked, invaded by roots from old trees whose twisted branches hung low, clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. Every instinct in his body told him to leave. But he pressed on, gripping the key tighter, feeling a cold weight sinking deeper into his chest with every breath. Inside, the house smelled of wet wood and dust older than memory. Wallpaper peeled like rotting flesh, and the silence was heavy, too heavy, as if the house were listening. His footsteps echoed unnaturally, repeating themselves long after he had stopped walking. The lawyer's letter contained only one instruction: do not enter the attic. Whatever happens, never look into the mirror at midnight. Daniel laughed when he read it. People love dramatic warnings. But standing alone in the dark hallway, he was no longer so sure. That night, Daniel set up a small camping light on a table near the cold fireplace and sat on the dusty floor reviewing old documents. He found inside a locked drawer, yellowed papers, brittle letters, and a family tree stretching back more than 120 years. The previous owner, Eleanor Westwood. His grandmother's sister had vanished in 1991. Official reports claimed she left the country without informing neighbors, but no trace of travel records or sightings existed. Daniel's family never spoke about her. It was as if she had simply been erased from existence. Wind screamed outside, rattling window frames. The temperature dropped sharply, frost climbing the glass from the edges inward. He turned on his flashlight, and that was when he saw it. A door at the end of the hallway was slightly open. The attic door, he was certain it had been closed earlier. He stood motionless, listening, silence. Then a sound. Faint, slow, deliberate tap. Tap, tap. As if something was gently tapping on glass. He shook his head, convincing himself it was loose wood or a tree branch. But still, he felt something else. A sensation of being watched, observed from above. Like cold eyes pressed against his spine, midnight came silently, ushered by the slow ticking of an antique clock whose pendulum still swung despite no power. Connected, 12 o'clock. Everything stopped. No wind, no ticking. Even the fog outside froze in place then. From the attic above him, a whisper. Daniel. He froze. His heart hammered painfully against his ribs. He told himself it was just memory playing tricks. But then the whisper came again. Clearer, closer, sharper. Daniel, come see. The light flickered violently, then died. Darkness swallowed the house whole. Daniel climbed the stairs slowly, each step groaning under his weight. His flashlight flickered, threatening to abandon him. The tapping sound grew louder, sharper, like fingers on glass. At the attic door, he hesitated. The air was colder here, tasting metallic like blood. He felt pressure inside his skull, a deep, vibrating hum beneath his thoughts. Something wanted him to open the door, something waiting just beyond. He pushed the door open. The attic was enormous, bigger than any room in the house, filled with dust-covered furniture shrouded in white sheets like corpses prepared for burial. Cobwebs hung thick, catching moonlight like strands of silver hair, and at the far end stood the mirror, 7 feet tall. Black wooden frame carved with symbols he didn't recognize. A dirty white sheet draped over it, but it was moving. Breathing, the tapping was coming from behind the cloth, from inside the glass. Daniel reached forward with a shaking hand. He hesitated only a second before pulling the sheet away. The mirror surface shimmered like water. He stared into it, but the reflection did not match the room. In the glass, the attic was not abandoned. It was restored, vibrant, lit by candles. And behind him stood a woman in a long black dress, her face pale, her eyes hollow and endless. She leaned forward, close to the glass, and whispered, "You should not have come here." Before Daniel could move, the attic door slammed shut behind him. The candles in the reflection went out. The glass turned pitch black, and something cold pressed against the back of his neck. He was not alone. The attic seemed to hold its breath, a stillness so dense that Daniel felt as if the entire house had stopped in time. His own heartbeat echoed loudly in his chest, almost drowning out the distant sound of rain beginning to fall. The flashlight in his hand flickered again, the beam shrinking to a faint, trembling circle. Before him, the mirror stood silent, its surface no longer fully reflective. Instead, it pulsed with a strange, cold light, breathing like a living thing. He could feel it pulling at him, almost physically tugging at the space behind his eyes. The woman inside the glass didn't move at first. She stood motionless, her black dress rippling slightly as though caught in a wind Daniel couldn't feel. Her hair hung long and tangled, shrouding parts of her face, but her eyes were wrong. They were wide and hollow, bottomless pools of darkness where light seemed to die. She lifted her hand slowly, fingers long and unnaturally thin, bones pressing against translucent skin. Her palm pressed flat against the inside of the mirror, the glass rippling like water where her hand touched it. Daniel stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. The woman tilted her head slightly, almost childlike, almost curious, and whispered, "You can see me." Her voice wasn't spoken aloud. It crept directly into Daniel's skull, vibrating through his bones like a distant echo through an empty cathedral. He wanted to speak, to ask who she was, but his throat locked shut, strangling the words. Instead, he simply stared, frozen between terror and fascination. The woman leaned closer to the glass, her face now only inches from Daniel's own reflection. Her smile stretched too far, too wide, revealing teeth that were sharp and gray, like stone worn smooth by centuries of decay. "It has begun," she hissed. "Now you belong to the mirror." As she spoke, something dark moved behind her in the reflection. A shifting mass of shadows that crawled across the attic floor like a swarm of living tendrils. Slow and searching, Daniel spun around in panic, but behind him, the real attic remained empty. No shadows, no woman, only silence. But when he turned back, his reflection was gone. The mirror showed an attic, but not the one he stood in. The room in the glass was bright, clean, furnished with polished floors and candlelit shelves. The air there looked warm, golden, and at its center stood another Daniel, or something wearing his face, but the eyes were black. Daniel continued, staring into the mirror, unable to tear his gaze away. The figure inside his reflection began to walk toward the glass, moving slowly. Each footstep echoing through Daniel's skull, even though no sound filled the attic. The other Daniel stopped only inches from the inside of the surface and smiled, a slow, unnatural stretch of lips that revealed teeth too sharp. Too many, and then the figure raised its hand and tapped gently on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. The same sound Daniel had heard earlier. The sound that had called him here. His skin crawled with cold dread, sweat freezing on his spine. He stepped back and the mere figure stepped forward, matching perfectly. Like a puppeteer shadowing its puppet. And then the whispers began. At first, they sounded like wind pushing through cracks in the house. Then they became voices, dozens of them speaking at once, low and frantic. Let us out. We are here. He sees us. It begins again. Trapped, trapped, trapped. Daniel clamped his hands over his ears, but the voices only grew louder inside his head. He staggered backward, knocking over an old crate that split open on the floor, spilling photographs across the dust-covered wood. Black and white images scattered everywhere, old portraits of men. Women and children, each staring blankly into the camera. Their expressions hollow, their bodies stiff like corpses posed for burial. He picked one up, a little girl with braids and lifeless eyes, and turned it over. A message written in faded ink. They watched from behind the glass. His breath trembled. Another photograph, a young man wearing a military uniform. On the back, the mirror takes what IT needs. A third photo, grainy and damaged, showed the very attic he stood in now, but transformed, full of candles, mirrors lining the walls. A circle drawn on the floor in chalk and beside it. The words, "She is not alone." Suddenly, the house groaned, a deep rumble from the walls, as though something massive shifted inside them. Plaster dust rained down. Wood snapped like bone. Then footsteps, slow, heavy. Coming up the stairs, Daniel froze. Heart slamming against his ribs. Someone, or something, was climbing toward the attic. He looked around wildly for something to defend himself with. But the attic was empty, except for broken furniture and the mirror that glowed brighter now. Pulsing like a heartbeat, the footsteps reached the top of the staircase. Stopped, silence, then a knock on the attic door. 3 sharp knocks. Like someone forcing their way through. Daniel backed away, nearly tripping. The door handle began to turn slowly, and the woman's voice filled his head again. Stronger, colder, stretching like ice beneath skin. Do not open the door. It is already inside. Lightning ripped across the sky outside, briefly illuminating the attic window with a blinding flash. Thunder roared through the house, shaking the floor. The mirror burst into blinding white light, flooding the attic with an icy glow. The surface rippled violently like storm-torn water, and a wind began to blow from inside it, freezing, screaming, pulling. Loose papers and photographs spun around Daniel like a whirlwind. The attic door shook violently, something slamming against it from the other side, trying to break through. Daniel tried to run, but his feet wouldn't move. The pull from the mirror gripped him like invisible hands crushing his ribs. He gasped as his body lurched forward, sliding across the floor toward the glass. The voices screamed now, hundreds, layered, tormented. Do not look. Do not look. Do not look. But it was too late. The black-eyed reflection pressed both hands against the inside of the mirror, palms flat on the glass. Daniel could feel them against his own hands, cold like stone, and then the surface broke. Not shattered, opened, like a membrane tearing. Tendrils of black smoke burst outward, wrapping around Daniel's arms and legs, pulling him toward the mirror. He screamed, but his voice was swallowed instantly. Vanishing into the deafening roar of wind, the mirror figure stepped backward inside the reflection, creating space, inviting him in. And the woman in the black dress stepped out of the shadows behind the reflection. Her face twisted into something no longer remotely human. "Cross over," she whispered. "Your world is not real." The attic door behind Daniel exploded inward. Wood splintering, metal tearing. Something unseen stormed into the room. Roaring like a beast, Daniel was torn forward, the mirror glowing brighter than the sun, and as his body hit the glass surface, he felt himself pulled through it like water. The world around him went, silent, cold, black dot, and then he opened his eyes. He was standing in the attic again, but the furniture was whole. The air warm. Candles burning gently around the room, and behind him, he heard footsteps slow approaching. The next night arrived like a slow suffocation, the house sinking into silence thick enough to taste. And Emily found herself unable to sleep as the mirrors seemed to breathe in the darkness, its surface pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat behind glass. The air turned icy, the temperature falling so rapidly that her breath fogged before her face. And the shadows along the walls began to stretch and drag themselves across the floor as though reaching for her feet. She blinked hard, terrified to look directly at it, but the mirror demanded attention, whispering her name in a voice that sounded like her own. Only older, damaged, and layered with pain. When she finally looked, she saw a reflection that was not her double stood inside the glass. Eyes black and pupils endless, smiling with a mouth too wide and teeth too sharp, as if carved into her skull. Slowly, the reflection lifted its hand, pressing its palm against the inner side of the mirror, and Emily's body moved unwillingly to match it, her hand rising as if gripped by invisible strings. The instant her skin touched the freezing glass, every light in the room exploded with blinding brightness. A violent scream ripped through the air, and the reflection slammed its other bloody hand against the surface so hard that spiderweb cracks burst across the mirror. Emily fell backward onto the floor, gasping in terror, and the last thing she heard before the lights died was the echoing hiss of her own voice, whispering from inside the split glass, "I'm coming out." Emily barricaded the mirror under a heavy blanket and stuffed towels under the door. But the house breathed around her like something alive, every wall groaning as if bones were shifting beneath plaster. And the whispers began again, soft at first, layered and overlapping, building into a chorus of suffering voices clawing their way into her ears. She covered her head, but the voices drilled straight through, speaking in broken sentences, chanting her name, begging for release, laughing in cruel hysteria. Footsteps began to run across the ceiling overhead, fast and frantic like children sprinting in circles, while something heavy dragged across the attic floor above her room, scraping loudly as though a corpse was being pulled by its hair. Then came the knocking, slow, rhythmic, deliberate against the mirror under the blanket, each strike harder than the last, until wood began to crack and the floor vibrated violently. The voices inside the walls screamed in unison, their agony shaking the air. And beneath their cries, Emily heard one distinct voice, soft and trembling, the voice of a little girl whispering, "Please help me. He won't let me out." Emily froze in terror, her blood turning to ice. Because the voice belonged to her younger sister, her sister who had died 10 years earlier, whose body was found hanging in the basement after claiming that someone in the mirror had been speaking to her too. Unable to breathe, Emily ripped the blanket away and crawled toward the mirror, drawn by a mixture of terror and desperate hope. But the cracks in the glass had grown like veins across its surface, glowing faintly with a pulsing red light that seemed to drip like liquid blood. Inside the mirror, the reflection no longer resembled hurt skin stretched unnaturally tight, face elongated and torn, eyes bleeding black tears that streamed endlessly down its hollow cheeks. Behind it, in the dark space beyond the reflective surface, Emily saw movement. Dozens of pale, human shapes standing motionless in an impossible room lined with mirrors that extended into darkness forever. Their bodies hung limp, necks broken, wrists bound by rusted wire. And their blind eyes rolled upward as if trapped in eternal torment. A towering shadow moved behind them, a figure with a body of swirling smoke and arms like twisted branches, its face hidden behind a mask carved from shattered mirror shards. It reached forward, placing its jagged hand against the inside of the glass. And when it spoke, the sound was a low, grinding roar like stone scraping stone. One must replace the last. The mirror must be fed. The prisoners in the glass snapped their heads toward Emily all at once, mouths opening in a simultaneous, bone-shattering scream. And the mirror began to bulge outward as if the thing inside was pushing through, the surface stretching like wet skin ready to burst. Night fell like a weight, crushing the house. The darkness so dense that the moonlight seemed swallowed before it even reached the window. And Emily felt the air tightening around her throat as if invisible hands were slowly closing in. Every clock in the house stopped at exactly 3:03 a.m. Their ticking silenced at the same time, leaving a hollow ringing inside her skull like church bells underwater. The mirror trembled violently on the floor, the cracked glass heaving like lungs trying to breathe. And streaks of thick, black liquid began leaking from the fractures, pooling across the floorboards like oil mixed with blood, spreading toward her trembling knees. The voices rose against us, then hundreds screaming, crying, laughing, whispering in languages she did not understand, until the house shook hard enough that dust poured from the ceiling like falling ash from a burning world. Emily tried to run, but her legs buckled beneath her. Paralyzed by a force she could not see, and every window in the house exploded inward at once, spraying shards of glass that floated suspended in the air like frozen rain. The room spun into chaos, but even amid the storm of shrieking wind and screaming spirits, one sound stood above all others, a slow, rhythmic pounding from inside the mirror, like a fist beating against a coffin lid. With each strike, the cracks widened, bleeding darker, thicker, hotter, until steam rose from the floor. And then she heard a voice, low, cold, ancient, whispering through the cracks with the certainty of a verdict. The door is opening, and you cannot stop it. The mirror split open with a deafening crack like bone breaking, and the surface peeled apart like torn flesh, revealing a writhing darkness inside it that churned like liquid shadow. The first hand that emerged was pale and skeletal, fingers elongated like sharpened bone, dragging itself forward with the sound of tendons snapping under strain. Then another hand followed, then another, until dozens of arms clawed through the glass, pulling broken, mutilated bodies out of the mirror figures with twisted spines, torn lips, eyes dangling from blackened sockets, all gasping like drowned victims taking their first breath. They collapsed onto the floor in heaps, twitching violently as if electricity surged through their veins, then rose with sickening jerks, their heads snapping toward Emily like puppets brought to life, their mouths stretched impossibly wide, tearing open as they began to scream in a single nightmarish harmony that rattled the room like an earthquake. Behind them, still inside the mirror, Emily saw the masked shadow towering among the trembling prisoners, its jagged mirror shard mask reflecting her terrified face back at her like a distorted memory. It raised one arm long and skeletal, ending in claws like broken blades. The crawling corpses froze mid-movement as if held by invisible strings. Then they turned in perfect unison and began marching toward her, their feet dragging, bones snapping with every step, their mouths spilling one whispered sentence again and again. It's your turn. Your turn. Your turn. Emily tried to scream, but her voice died in her throat as the tallest corpse leaned inches from her face, its breath smelling like rot and grave dirt, and whispered, "The mirror keeps what it takes." Emily crawled backward until her spine struck the wall, her fingernails ripping against the floorboards as she tried to escape the advancing dead. But the demon inside the mirror lifted its clawed hand again, and the marching corpses froze, tilting their broken heads toward the towering shadow like obedient slaves. The demon stepped forward, pressing its jagged mask against the boundary of the mirror, and the glass stretched like skin beneath its face, forming a grotesque impression of its features, pushing outward toward the world. The blood pooling across the floor suddenly reversed direction, flowing back toward the mirror like liquid dragged uphill, swirling into a spiraling vortex that glowed red like molten metal, and Emily felt her limbs lock rigid, her body rising to its feet against her will held by invisible strings, just as her reflection had moved before. The demon's voice rolled through the house like thunder shaking through the bones of the earth, deeper than anything human, layered with 1,000 trapped screams. One life for one door. Blood for passage. Choose. The corpses split apart, forming a path between them, revealing a final figure stepping forward, a young girl. Maybe 8 years old, wearing a torn nightgown soaked in blood, eyes wide with terror and sorrow. Emily collapsed when she recognized her sister, her skin gray and bruised, rope marks carved into her neck, trembling hands reaching out. The child whispered through cracked lips, tears mixing with blood, "Please, don't let him take me again." Emily's heart shattered, but the demon spoke once more, the glass bulging so far it was seconds from ripping open completely. "Only one may leave. You or her." The corpses leaned forward, grinning with broken teeth, whispering in a chorus of pure hunger. And Emily felt the floor trembling beneath her feet as the mirror began to melt, preparing to open wide enough for the monster to enter the world. The house trembled like a living organism in agony, every wall arching inward as if the structure itself wanted to collapse and bury what was happening inside it forever. And Emily felt her heart beating so violently she thought it might burst through her ribs as the demon pressed against the surface of the mirror, forcing its monstrous face further into the world. The corpses surrounding her stood perfectly still, heads tilted like broken marionettes waiting for a command. And the child who had once been her sister trembled on shaking knees, her tiny hands reaching out with such pleading desperation that Emily felt her soul ripping apart. The demon's voice split the air like jagged metal tearing through bone, echoing inside her skull until she nearly went deaf, the words vibrating through the very fibers of the house. Choose. The door must be fed. One soul, freely given. Emily felt the invisible force tightening around her chest, pulling her forward toward the mirror as though her body already belonged to it. And she could see her reflection inside the glass knot, the demon version now. But herself, terrified and defeated, eyes filled with the knowledge that there was no path to survival any longer. Her sister sobbed, shaking her head violently, choking through broken breaths. "No. Not again. Please don't let him take me." And at that moment, Emily understood the truth behind the endless mirrors inside the dimension she had seen. Every prisoner trapped inside was someone who had chosen themselves over another, sacrificing a loved one to survive. She tasted blood in her mouth from biting down so hard, tears burning her face as she forced her voice past the fear crushing her lungs, whispering with a breaking voice, "Take me instead." The corpses froze, the house fell silent, and even the wind outside stopped as if the world itself was holding its breath. The demon's mask twisted into a jagged grin, shards of razor glass shifting like living blades as it raised its arms, and the corpses surrounding Emily collapsed to their knees, bowing with sickening cracks of bone as if worshipping a god of death. A violent wind roared through the room, tearing curtains into ribbons, overturning furniture, and ripping paint from the walls in strips as the cracked mirror began to glow with a blinding white light, brighter than lightning, pulsating like a heartbeat that shook the earth. The blood on the floor surged upward into a spiraling torrent, swirling around Emily's body like a tornado of liquid darkness, lifting her slowly off the ground. Her arms stretched out helplessly as though she were already hanging from an invisible noose. Her sister screamed in horror, trying to reach her, but the corpses pinned the child down with their broken limbs, their empty eyes watching silently as the vortex tightened around Emily's chest, crushing her ribs until she felt them snap one by one. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the roar of the mirror as the demon reached through, claws ripping through reality like wet cloth, wrapping around her throat with a grip colder than ice and heavier than death itself. Her vision blurred, her body shaking violently, blood spilling from her mouth as she felt her soul being pulled apart like threads unraveling. And in the last moment before she lost consciousness, she saw her sister's tear-soaked face staring up at her with a look of pure agony and love. The demon whispered one last sentence, a promise carved into eternity. The mirror keeps what it claims. And with a final shattering burst of light, Emily's body was ripped into the mirror, vanishing completely as the glass sealed shut with a thunderous crack that shook the world. When the light finally died, the house stood in perfect silence, no wind, no movement, no whispers, only the hollow ringing quiet that follows catastrophic destruction. The corpses lay scattered across the floor like discarded dolls, their bodies dissolving into dust that drifted upward before vanishing in thin air. And the temperature rose slowly from freezing to normal, as if the world were exhaling after holding breath too long. The mirror rested against the wall, now smooth and flawless, without a single crack or stain, polished and calm, like any ordinary mirror that might hang in any ordinary room. The little girl remained alone on the floor, blood drying on her small hands, staring silently at her own reflection in the now perfect glass. For a moment, she whispered her sister's name, and the sound fell into emptiness with no answer. She stood, trembling, and approached the mirror, her fingertips brushing the surface, hoping for any sign of the one who had given her life so she could be free. And just as she turned to walk away, believing all was over, the mirror rippled like water disturbed by breath, and a faint, distant scream echoed from deep inside its infinite darkness's scream that belonged, unmistakably, to Emily. The reflection of the girl stopped walking, turning its head independently, smiling with the same too-wide grin Emily once saw, black tears dripping down its cheeks as it whispered in a shattered voice not heard in this world, "I told you I was coming out." The lights flickered. The screen went black.